Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's question comes to us straight out of the Judge Vault, and this specific one was suggested by viewer Rolyak. Amy uses an Amoeboid Changeling to make her grizzly bears gain all creature types. Afterwards, she plays a clone and makes it a copy of the grizzly bears. Will the clone have all creature types or not? Alright, so this truly is a Judge Vault question. I think this is probably the first question I ask anyone who I'm teaching about continuous effects and specifically copy effects. And I think that most other people are probably going to see a similar experience with their mentors. This sort of question really encapsulates a lot of the difficulties that people tend to have with copy effects right out of the gates, and it gives people a nice framework that they can use to approach this sort of a question. So if you haven't heard this one before, the answer to this question is that copy effects do not generally take into account any other kind of continuous effect when they're copying an object. So to put that into a little bit more concrete terms, for the specific case introduced in the problem statement before, we have the grizzly bears, and there's a continuous effect acting on the grizzly bears that makes it want to have all creature types. That continuous effect is not taken into account when the clone copies it. And so that means the clone is just going to end up as being a normal bear that doesn't have any other creature types. Now that we've got that established, I want to take some time to help everybody maybe develop a little bit more intuition for why this rule is the way that it is. And the answer has to do with layers. I think that most people probably know that in the game of Magic, continuous effects are broken down into different layers based on what kind of thing that those continuous effects do. And continuous effects in one layer are always applied in the same spot in the continuous effect ordering relative to other layers. So because copy effects are in the first layer, that means that any copy effect is always going to be applied before any other effect that is not a copy effect. And so that can kind of give a little bit of intuition for why this answer is the way that it is. Because a copy effect is going to be applied before, for example, a type, subtype, or supertype changing effect, which happens in layer 4. It wouldn't really make sense for the clone copy effect to be able to see that there was a continuous effect that was wanting to change the thing's types, subtypes, or supertypes, because that happens in a later layer. When the copying is going on, it's layer 1, so we don't really have any effects from stuff that happens in layer 4 yet. This also can give a little bit of intuition for why a similar question with a really similar setup might have a different answer. Let's consider this one, which is also another staple Judge Vault question. If you have a grizzly bears and you copy it with a Phantasmal Image, then the Phantasmal Image has a copy effect that makes it be an illusion in addition to the normal types that it gets. So if you were to clone that Phantasmal Image, would the clone also be an illusion or not? And so we can see that with this situation, we've got a little something different going on. The Phantasmal Image copy effect says that it becomes a copy of the grizzly bears except that it gets an extra creature type. It doesn't become a copy of the grizzly bears and then after the fact put another continuous effect on there that makes it be an illusion in addition to that type. Rather, the becoming an illusion is actually part of the copy effect itself. You can kind of think of it as, instead of becoming a perfect copy of the grizzly bears the way the clone might, the Phantasmal Image becomes a copy of the grizzly bears except that it has an extra creature type stapled on there. And so because this stuff is going on during the copying process, then it kind of does make sense that if you were to play a clone on that Phantasmal Image, then you would be able to access that information about it getting an additional creature type, even though that answer might seem to kind of conflict with what we said a little bit earlier about the Amoeboid Changeling. It's a really similar situation, but that's what the difference is that causes the answer to be different. So in case you're wondering, for a very similar reason, the clone will also have that ability that the Phantasmal Image gets where you have to sacrifice it if it becomes the target of a spell or ability. That works for the exact same reason why the clone is also going to be an illusion. Now, there's one additional thing in this original question that I introduced at the beginning of the episode that kind of points to the layer process, and I wanted to go over that one too. Let's take another look at Amoeboid Changeling, and we'll notice that it says, target creature gains all creature types until end of turn. Now, if you were playing back in this block, you might remember that this is the block where the Changeling ability was introduced. And so you might be wondering, well, if the Changeling ability was around during this time, then why would Amoeboid Changeling not be worded something like, tap, target creature gains Changeling until end of turn? And you know, that does kind of make some sense, but it turns out there's a very good reason why they did not word it this way. And the reason again has to do with the layers. Creature type, subtype, and supertype changing effects happen in layer 4, which is before ability adding and removing effects happen in layer 6. So if you were to have this sort of thing happen, then you would have the Amoeboid Changeling give Changeling to something, which wouldn't happen until layer 6. And so in layer 4, which is when Changeling needs to be around in order to apply, the creature that you targeted doesn't have Changeling yet. And so we've got this kind of weird situation where the Changeling ability actually does absolutely nothing because it hasn't been gained by the time that it needs to be existing in order for it to do its job. So that's the reason why, unless Wizards changes the rules on how stuff like this works, we're very unlikely to see any card ever say something like target creature gains Changeling or loses Changeling, because such an ability actually would not work if you were to give it this way. And that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling, but until then, I hope you have a great day.